If you think they just show up one day and say, "I miss you," you're already too late. Because long before they come back, they test you, quietly, strategically, and without ever announcing themselves. And here's the unsettling truth. If even one of these tests works, they don't just return, they return stronger. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, pause for a moment. And instead of reaching out, protect your clarity. Subscribe or follow if you're ready to stop reacting and start seeing patterns before they trap you again. The first test happens quietly and almost invisibly, which is why it works so well. Digital presence scanning is about observation without engagement. Long before a narcissistic person ever considers reaching out, they watch your online behavior to measure emotional availability. They scroll without liking, view stories without responding, and check timestamps to see how active you are. This allows them to collect information while maintaining distance, control, and deniability. From their perspective, this is a risk-free way to assess whether you are still psychologically accessible. What they are really looking for is not happiness, but emotional signal. Posts that express sadness, nostalgia, anger, loneliness, or even growth can all be interpreted as signs of relevance. A quote about healing may not register as strength to them. It may register as unfinished attachment. Even positive posts can be misread if they suggest performative confidence rather than grounded detachment. Consistency matters more than content. If you are posting frequently, engaging heavily, or responding emotionally online, it suggests to them that your inner world is still externally visible. Story views are especially valuable data points. Stories disappear, which makes them feel intimate and impulsive. When they watch every story without interacting, they are monitoring your emotional rhythm in real time. Are you posting late at night? Are your captions reflective or reactive? Are you seeking validation through engagement? Each of these becomes part of an internal profile they build to decide timing and strategy. They are not asking whether you are happy, they are asking whether you are still reachable. What makes this test dangerous is that it creates the illusion of being unseen. You may feel ignored, forgotten, or dismissed, which can lead to oversharing or increased posting in an unconscious attempt to feel visible again. That reaction, however, provides exactly the confirmation they seek. Emotional exposure without boundaries communicates access without requiring effort. The power shift occurs when you stop performing your inner life online. Reduced visibility, neutral presence, or intentional privacy disrupts their ability to gather data. When there is no emotional information to analyze, the test fails. And when the test fails, the strategy often collapses before it ever reaches direct contact. The second test operates through distance and delegation, allowing the narcissistic person to gather emotional information without taking responsibility or risking rejection. Third-party probing is the use of other people as instruments to assess whether you are still emotionally reactive, open, or attached. This often shows up as a sudden message from a mutual friend, a casual mention from a family member, or an indirect question framed as concern or curiosity. On the surface, it appears harmless, even coincidental, but the timing and content are rarely random. The purpose of this test is to measure emotional charge. When your name comes up, do you soften, tense, over-explain, or become visibly affected? Do you ask follow-up questions about them? Do you express anger, sadness, longing, or confusion? Any emotional movement is interpreted as data. Neutrality, brevity, and emotional flatness, on the other hand, are confusing and discouraging to them. Through intermediaries, they are looking for signs that the emotional bond still exists without exposing themselves to vulnerability. This method also preserves their self-image. By not contacting you directly, they avoid the risk of rejection and maintain a sense of superiority. If the information comes back favorable, they feel validated and justified in re-entering. If it does not, they can retreat without injury to their ego. The third party often has no idea they are being used as a conduit. They may believe they are helping, checking in, or keeping peace, unaware that they are part of a psychological test. There is also a manipulation layer built into this strategy. Hearing about them indirectly can stir curiosity, reopen emotional wounds, or create a false sense of inevitability. You may start replaying memories or imagining a future interaction that has not yet happened. That internal shift is the real success of the test. It moves your focus back onto them without them having to appear. The most powerful response is emotional containment. When you keep your reactions minimal and your response is non-revealing, the information loop breaks. Without emotional feedback, the message that returns to them is uncertainty. And uncertainty removes their confidence to advance because control depends on predictability. The third test relies on subtle emotional activation rather than direct communication, which is why it often feels confusing and easy to dismiss. Memory baiting is the strategic use of shared history to see if the emotional connection still responds. This may look like an old photo suddenly being liked, a song being sent with no context, a familiar phrase repeated publicly, or an inside joke referenced indirectly. These gestures are deliberately ambiguous. They allow the narcissistic person to activate your emotional memory while preserving plausible deniability if questioned. The psychological aim here is to bypass your rational defenses and go straight to emotional recall. Shared memories are powerful because they are encoded with intimacy, vulnerability, and attachment. When one of those memories is triggered unexpectedly, your nervous system reacts before your logic does. That momentary emotional shift is what they are testing for. If you feel a surge of nostalgia, confusion, warmth, or even anger, the bond is still alive in their assessment. What makes this test particularly effective is that it often causes internal engagement without external response. You may not reply, but you think about it. You replay moments. You wonder why they did it. From their perspective, this is still a success. The test is not about getting an immediate message back. It is about reoccupying psychological space. If they believe they are still present in your inner world, they feel licensed to escalate. These actions are often timed carefully. They tend to appear when you seem to be moving on, stabilizing, or regaining independence. That timing is not accidental. It is meant to destabilize progress and reassert emotional relevance. Because the behavior is small, it is easy to rationalize it as accidental or meaningless. That minimization keeps you from recognizing it as a deliberate probe. The danger lies in how easily this test can draw you back into interpretation mode. You start searching for hidden meanings, motives, or sincerity. That mental effort itself restores the power dynamic they prefer. Your attention becomes the reward. The antidote is refusing to assign meaning to ambiguous gestures. When you do not react internally or externally, the bait loses value. Without emotional reinforcement, the behavior no longer produces the reassurance they seek. And when the memory no longer hooks you, the test fails to reopen the door they were quietly checking to see was still unlocked. The fourth test is designed to exploit empathy and moral responsibility, making it one of the most effective ways a narcissistic person regains access. Crisis fabrication does not always mean a completely false emergency. It often involves exaggerating distress, selectively sharing hardship, or presenting themselves as overwhelmed, misunderstood, or abandoned. The message is crafted to sound vulnerable and human, triggering your instinct to help rather than your instinct to protect yourself. This test works because it reframes the dynamic. Instead of being the one who caused harm, they position themselves as the one who is suffering. The focus subtly shifts away from past behavior and onto their present pain. When you respond with concern, reassurance, or availability, they interpret it as proof that emotional access is still intact. Compassion becomes data. Your willingness to engage during their distress signals that boundaries are still negotiable. What makes this tactic particularly manipulative is the moral pressure attached to it. You may feel that ignoring someone in pain makes you cold or cruel. That internal conflict weakens your resolve and pushes you toward engagement, even when you know contact has previously led to harm. The narcissistic person relies on this inner struggle. They understand that empathy can override memory, especially when urgency is introduced. The communication is often vague on purpose. Details are incomplete, timelines are unclear, and the crisis is framed in a way that invites questions. Each question you ask pulls you deeper into the interaction. Each response confirms to them that you are emotionally present. Even skepticism can be useful because it still provides attention and energy. Another layer of this test is reassurance seeking. They may ask if they are a bad person, if anyone still cares, or if you ever think about them. These questions are not about growth or accountability. They are about stabilizing their self-image through your response. If you offer comfort, they feel justified in continuing contact. If you withdraw, they may escalate the crisis to increase pressure. The healthiest response is emotional discipline. Acknowledging suffering does not require re-entry into a harmful dynamic. When you resist the urge to rescue, you disrupt the test. Without the emotional payoff they are seeking, the crisis loses its function as a bridge back into your life. And when compassion is paired with distance, control no longer has a place to reattach. The fifth test is rooted in comparison and self-doubt, and it is often the final check before a narcissistic person decides to reappear directly. Ego inflation involves showcasing improvement, desirability, or success in a way that is highly visible but not directly addressed to you. This can look like curated social media posts, public displays of happiness, new achievements, or sudden validation from others. The intent is not genuine growth, but psychological impact. This test is designed to provoke an internal reaction rather than a visible one. They want to know whether you feel replaced, diminished, curious, or unsettled by the image they project. If their apparent success causes you to question your worth, your progress, or your decision to leave, the test is working. Emotional comparison is interpreted as lingering attachment. Indifference, on the other hand, suggests loss of influence. What makes ego inflation effective is its ambiguity. They are not contacting you, not asking for attention, and not overtly referencing the past. This allows them to maintain a narrative of having moved on while still monitoring your reaction. If you watch their content repeatedly, ask others about them, or feel a pull to re-engage, they assume the emotional door remains open. There is also a reversal of power embedded in this tactic. By appearing elevated, they attempt to position themselves as the prize once again. This can reactivate old dynamics where you felt you had to earn approval or compete for value. Even negative reactions, such as anger or disbelief, still center them in your emotional world, which serves their purpose. The timing of this test is rarely random. It often appears when you are rebuilding stability or regaining confidence. The contrast between your quiet progress and their loud display can be destabilizing if you are not grounded. That destabilization is what they are measuring. If it works, they feel confident approaching you with renewed entitlement. The key to neutralizing this test is internal detachment. When you no longer compare, analyze, or interpret their performance, the display loses its audience. Without your emotional response, the inflated image has no function. And when their sense of importance is no longer reinforced by your attention, the motivation to return weakens because control without impact has no reward. The sixth test emerges when the earlier probes have produced uncertainty or partial access, and it focuses on boundary erosion rather than emotional activation. This test is about seeing whether your limits are firm or flexible. It often appears as a small request, a casual favor, or a seemingly harmless question that crosses a line you previously set. The request itself may not look significant, which is exactly why it is chosen. They are not testing the request. They are testing your response to it. This test relies on gradualism. If you allow a minor boundary violation, they register that as permission to push further. If you explain your boundary instead of enforcing it, they hear negotiability. If you feel compelled to justify, soften, or reassure while saying no, they note emotional leverage. What they are assessing is not kindness, but compliance potential. Boundaries that require emotional labor to maintain are seen as weak points. The manipulation here often comes wrapped in reasonableness. They may frame the request as practical, urgent, or considerate of your past connection. You may be told that you are the only one who understands, the only one who can help, or the only safe person. This language is designed to bypass logic and appeal directly to identity. If you respond by stepping into that role again, even briefly, the test succeeds. Silence or consistency tends to provoke escalation. If you do not respond, they may increase pressure or attempt to reframe the request in a more emotionally compelling way. This is not persistence born of need. It is persistence born of entitlement. They believe access should still exist, and they are checking whether resistance is temporary or structural. What makes this test especially deceptive is that it can feel empowering to say no while still engaging. But engagement itself can become the reward. Each interaction reassures them that they still matter, that their presence still affects you, and that your boundaries require their participation to hold. When boundaries are enforced without explanation, emotion, or negotiation, the test fails. Clarity without engagement removes the incentive to continue probing. And when access is no longer conditional on mood, guilt, or history, the structure they rely on to regain control simply has nowhere to attach. The seventh test centers on reaction extraction, which is the deliberate attempt to provoke an emotional response when direct access is uncertain. This test often appears as a subtle provocation, a passive-aggressive remark, a dismissive comment, or a behavior designed to feel disrespectful or unfair. The goal is not the content of the action itself, but the emotional movement it creates inside you. Anger, defensiveness, sadness, or the urge to correct the record are all seen as signs of remaining control. This test works because emotions can override intention. Even when you are committed to distance, a sharp trigger can pull you back into engagement before you realize what is happening. A comment that questions your character, rewrites history, or minimizes your experience can activate the need to defend yourself. From their perspective, that need is evidence that they still occupy an important psychological position. If you react, they feel validated in escalating. What makes this tactic especially manipulative is that negative attention is just as valuable as positive attention. Calm disinterest threatens their sense of relevance, but conflict restores it. When you argue, explain, or correct, the dynamic shifts back into familiar territory where they feel powerful. Your emotional energy becomes the fuel, regardless of whether the emotion is painful or justified. These provocations are often deniable. If confronted, they can claim misunderstanding, humor, or innocence. This ambiguity keeps you doubting your perception and increases the likelihood of engagement. You may feel compelled to clarify, to be fair, or to make yourself understood. That impulse is exactly what they are testing. Timing plays a key role. This test often shows up when other strategies have failed or when you appear emotionally stable. Stability threatens their influence, so disruption becomes the objective. If they can destabilize you even briefly, they regain confidence in their ability to affect you. The most effective response is emotional non-participation, not because the provocation is harmless, but because responding reinforces the behavior. When there is no visible emotional payoff, the strategy collapses. Without reaction, there is no confirmation of relevance. And when their attempts to disturb your inner state no longer work, the incentive to continue testing fades because power without response no longer exists. The eighth test is the final confirmation check used to decide whether a direct return will succeed or fail. This test revolves around future projection and false accountability, where a narcissistic person subtly references change, insight, or growth without demonstrating it. They may speak about therapy, self-reflection, lessons learned, or how differently they would handle things now. The purpose is not transformation, but reassurance that the past no longer needs to be addressed in detail. This test targets hope. When someone hints at growth, it activates the part of you that once believed in potential. You may feel curiosity, cautious optimism, or a sense of unfinished resolution. Those internal shifts are what they are measuring. If you lean in, ask questions, or express relief that they finally get it, the test succeeds. Your openness signals that accountability can remain vague and still be rewarded with access. The language used is often polished but non-specific. Apologies may be broad, focusing on outcomes rather than actions. Responsibility is framed in passive terms, avoiding ownership of harm. This allows them to appear evolved without confronting the discomfort of genuine repair. If you accept this level of accountability, they register that depth is not required to re-enter your life.